Mego is in the habit of making monsters. Here's your look at the Mego The Nun Valak 8-inch action figure. Marty Abrams, a.k.a. the father of the action figure, has relaunched these figures in response to an overwhelming demand. The Mego Corporation was started by his father David Abrams in 1954 and named by his younger brother Howard, who would say, "Me go too." Howard later became head of sales for the company. Mego Corporation has sold over 20 million now of its standard 8-inch action figures worldwide, and Mego Corporation is proud to take over that fine heritage today. Maybe first, before we look at Mego Nun, we actually grabbed the tape measure just to see how tall the figure stands. I'm going to go ahead and clock this figure at standing at around 7¼ inches in height. That's including her veil, after all. I'm going to flip that around, revealing that the nun is about 18½ centimeters tall. It's a small miss, but I kind of wish that this figure could have come included with her painting. It seems always the case whenever we get ourselves a nun from whatever company it may be, that the painting is always included. And I would have thought, if anything, they could have included a cardboard sheet or something depicting the painting of the nun. That being the case, though, the figure is decently detailed. We're going to have a look at her right now. One thing that's neat about the nun is that she does have a flip-around face. This is not the face, actually, if you may have noticed at the beginning of the review, that the packaging did have her with a more frightful face instead. For a second, I actually thought that Mego had corrected the face, decided later on that they didn't want to go with this head sculpt, but instead wanted to go with the shrieking head instead. In actual fact, though, what they've actually done was clever. You just simply remove the veil. You don't have to remove it, I suppose, entirely, but just take it off. And if you look at, first of all, the defaulted head sculpt. Actually, that's not really 100% true. This wasn't the defaulted head sculpt. If you turn the head around, this is what the head sculpt started at, though many of the advertisements online, especially Entertainment Earth, where I did pick up this figure for myself, they advertise it as this head sculpt here. It's not necessarily trickery, in just the sense that you actually have both heads represented here. And it's actually the first time I've seen them do this, any company do this with the nun. Instead of swappable heads, really, if you're going to have something being covered over by the veil anyways, it's a great way to conceal a secondary head sculpt without you having to literally pop the head off and replace it with something new. I think that's really fun the way they've done that. I mean, at the end of the day, for me, I'm going to compare then the two just so you can see the difference between the two. This one's a tad on the rougher side. Mego's not always striving for most accuracy on sculpts anyways, but I'd almost say like this head sculpt, if this was to be the one that settled, this was the one they just decided to go with moving forward and didn't even decide to go with this head sculpt, I think I would be a little more disappointed with this portrait of the nun. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nice that at least she does have shrieking, scary-looking teeth like this that are painted well between the yellow that they've used and the little bit of brushing of red. I do think that makes for a nice-looking head sculpt. But I don't think it's as good as necessarily this one right here. If you prefer instead your more somber looking nun, then this one does definitely do a better job of it. What's interesting though is, of course, because this one does have the open mouth, it does make her head quite considerably longer. Of course, you never be none the wiser if you just simply take the veil. The veil, by the way, is a wire frame. So really, once you've even got it on top of the nun's head, you easily can just manipulate it if you want. You can bend it out, or you can bring it in, I suppose, if you wanted to. Kind of just to give it just a mild curve. Just a mild curve on the tops of her shoulders. So a decent face, for what it is, for being a Mego after all. Of course, for the rest of her body, she's very lean. She's a tall drink of scary water. Holy water. I guess that wouldn't be the case, not holy water. If we just roll up the sleeves of her tunic here, you can sort of see. First of all, there's the hand that's popping out. We'll go ahead and just replace that back in there. There we go. She is very skinny on the arms. In fact, she's actually quite skinny everywhere. We're just gonna, I don't know if this would be the most decent thing to be doing with a nun, but just to kind of show you what the legs look like underneath. Just one singular hinge joint for the legs. And of course, she does possess the ball joints just underneath the tunic there. And then, of course, she does have quite proper-looking footwear, even for a scary nun like herself. The feet don't actually have pegals on the undersides of her feet, which is fine. I mean, she seems to be standing fine as well. She has the additional fabric that's just below. I guess the top of her tunic does have that little bit of that patch of white. And of course, she does have her faux leather belt. It's actually nice to see that they've used a pretty decent faux leather material to replicate the belt that she certainly would have had. Again, it looks a little out of place, of course, if she doesn't have her veil on top of her head. The only thing I would say, though, is that the veil falls off way too frequently. It probably doesn't help either that if you go decide to use this head sculpt, this one being a little bit higher almost seems like it wants to push the veil off. Maybe, if anything, they probably could have added like a peg joint or something there where you could have taken the veil and just literally plugged it down. But I guess you can kind of slightly conform the veil around her shoulders, keeping the veil somewhat in place. Let's now run through the articulation for the nun. I guess what we could probably just do is simply take the veil off for the time being. The head does rotate all the way around. It isn't necessarily on a ball joint. In fact, if you were to be able to peel this fabric away, you're seeing basically just a head that's pegged on top of a post. More than enough to easily rotate the head all the way around, but other than that, that's about all you're really going to be getting from these figures. The figure has also a decent articulation in the upper torso. Seems like they are using a ball joint. Equally so, there's also the elbow shoulder joint. That's a shoulder joint. Shoulder joint allows the arms to come out at 90 degrees. You can also bring the arms forward and back. She has only a single bend in the elbow, and she only has a single hinge in the wrist, which is more than enough, and also allows the wrist to rotate, of course, all the way around. The legs split out, but of course, you can see by the limitations of the material that they've used for her tunic, simply she just won't be able to move her legs out too far. You get a bit of a walking stance, but of course that's going to throw off kilter a bit. I think I just dropped her hand. We're going to have to go back and retrieve the hand in a second. I think it would, if you had her sidestepping or forward walking like this, it would certainly throw off the stance of the figure. And then, of course, she does have ankle articulation as well. So standard articulation when it comes to the nun here, being the Mego release version of the nun. Personally, again, I like the idea that first time seeing this, a company has actually been clever with the use of the veil. Considering it's also covering off the whole back section of her head, you could easily put anything there. You could put dog face, really, if you want to. Okay, let's not get too extreme here. But I do like the idea. I think that's clever on Mego's part that they actually gave you two different expressions without having to pop the heads off. First time I've ever seen a company do that. If you're a horror collector that prides themselves on film accuracy, then probably need not apply when it comes to the Mego release here of the Nun. You get a very stylized looking Valak. Across the board, of course, when it comes to other Mego releases as well, you're not going to get the most movie accurate likenesses of these characters. But, you know, to be fair, though, for what Mego is putting out there for figures, it gets the job done. Granted, yes, she doesn't come, or he doesn't come included with the painting. That's a bit of a disappointment. It really could have just easily been solved by including a little cardboard rectangle with a picture portrait of Valak on the front. But again, going back to the point I mentioned earlier, while it is a little more simplified on sculpting, and even though I have right now the shrieking face, that's not going to be the one that stays on this figure when I have it on display. I gotta give it, again, mad props to Mego for at least coming up with a clever use of swapping out the head sculpts without literally having to swap out the head sculpts. You're just literally taking the veil off and rotating the head. I think that's rather smart. I wish, though, it did result in the veil staying on a little bit better, because as you can already see, it's sort of slipping off the top of his head. Other than that, though, decent-looking Valak. If you are certainly a big fan of the Mego stuff and don't mind the fact that they're a little more simpler of figures, I think Valak's a great pickup and put on display kind of piece. Speaking of picking up, though, if you guys are interested to pick this one up for yourself and add it to your horror collection, I did find this one over on Entertainment Earth's website, to which I will provide the link down below in the video description if you guys are wishing to pick this one up also and adding it to your collection space. I'll provide the link down below. Hey, now, if you guys are new to this channel, you're enjoying the content that you're seeing, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. Make sure as well you're turning on the bell notification. And if you're also interested to see other things I've covered off from Mego, would you believe there would be a playlist popping up at the very end of this video? It's almost as if I planned all that. Maybe I did. But a playlist will be popping up of all the other Mego stuff that I've looked at over the years. If you fancy checking out more of that. Lots of stuff coming your way, guys. As always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.